Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me humbly, and with a little pride in this nation, welcome all of you to the second day of NESG 23. The first day was absolutely beautiful. Apart from the opening ceremony that had the inside session, which is a new thing, the plenary with the Vice President was insightful. We had the Policy Commission breakouts that nailed the issues a little bit further. And then at night, we had a dinner that had 4 young people tell us that the future is beautiful. So let me welcome all of you to the second day. We're expected to have started by 9 p.m., but it's almost 9:30 now, Wiki. Okay, a.m. I accept. And so we'll kick off. I'm very sure somewhere along the line we'll be able to make up for the 30 minutes. But let me welcome all of you. Our first session this morning will be on access to capital. But before we go into that, let me also welcome, I don't know how he does it, but he's here looking sharp this morning, the chairman of the board. Please welcome here this morning, ladies and gentlemen, Alhaji Abba Bukakari. I welcome you this morning. I'd like to also welcome the immediate past chairman of the board, Mr. Folusho Phillips, who is also here with us. I'd like to welcome him. Let me welcome all the members of the board, very eminent Nigerians, great players in the private sector that are here this morning. Let me welcome all of you. And so, without much ado, let me invite the panelists. Somebody was about to go and get them. I don't know if they're in the hall already. Ayo, we can move them in now, please. Okay. And so they just walked in. Our moderator this morning is the business editor, NTA. Please welcome Mr. Cliff Ayoze. That's him walking like a gentleman. Our members of the panel include the group CEO, EcoBank Transnational Incorporated, Mr. Ade Ayeyemi. The CEO of Development Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Tony Opanachi. The CEO of Helios Investment Partners, Mr. Kamal Bakrin. And then the founder of Verdant Agritech Limited, Mr. Nasiru Yamama. Actually, we're expected to have the CEO or the DG of SEC. If he steps in here, he will join the conversation. But at this point, my friend and brother, the moderator, Cliff Ayoze, takes over.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our conversation this morning will center on access to capital. And already we have the panelists introduced for better understanding of their persons. Permit me to also call attention to the presence of the Managing Director Group Chief Executive Officer of EcoBank Transnational Incorporated, Mr. Ade Ayeyemi. It's my pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Next to him, we have a man that has done so much with a portfolio of investments in over 25 countries. Helios is a leading Pan-African private equity firm. It focuses on sectors set to benefit from key drivers of Africa's growth, such as market liberalization, technology-driven productivity, urbanization, demographic dividend. I talk of Kamal Bakri. It's my pleasure to have you. Sitting next to me is the Chief Executive Officer, the Pioneer Chief Executive Officer of Development Bank of Nigeria, DBN, Mr. Tony Obanachi. Mr. Tony Obanachi, before his appointment, was former Managing Director of EcoBank in Kenya, with cluster Managing Director for East Africa, comprising Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, South Sudan, and Ethiopia. And he's going to bring all his experience to bear on our conversation this morning. My pleasure to welcome Tony Obanachi. Just a couple of days ago, the personality I'm about to introduce came back from the Forbes 30 on the 30 most successful and enterprising entrepreneurs. Having qualified as that, he is the founder of Verdant Agri-Tech Company, having studied information technology and business information systems at Middlesex University, London, and gained a master's in creative technology. He is one personality mentored by Sir Richard Branson and receives a startup grant for Verdant Agri-Tech, a social enterprise to support rural farmers with mobile technologies for sustainable farming and improved food production. And all this experience is going to bear on our discussion on access to capital. I'll talk of no other person than Nasri Yamama. It's my pleasure to have you. Today is something that many have continued to look forward to. We are aware that access to capital for businesses continue to be a foremost issue within the Nigerian business environment. Productivity, employment, and even opportunities can neither be created nor optimized if there is chronic inability to fund enterprises and innovative ideas. The cost of funds is relatively high, with average interest on loans from commercial banks at between 20 and 30% per annum, directly correlated by the returns on government securities and treasury bills, which stood at an average of 18% per annum. The continued concentration and attractiveness of investments into government securities and treasury bills by corporates, banks, and individuals have squeezed up liquidity and greatly imparted on the most cost of accessing funds. We need game-changing ideas that is beyond the overflowed issues of lack of collaterals, high interest rates, and general bank apathy to lending into the micro, small, and medium enterprises space, and discuss the broad options to accessing capital, such as equity capital, which tends to be longer capital and often the most appropriate type of capital, with innovators and long-term projects that needs time to bring return on investment. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause to yourselves for being part of this conversation this morning. We're kickstarting this by going to Helios, because today we talk about a whole lot access to capital. You are aware that in Nigeria, a survey conducted by the National Bureau of Statistics in collaboration with the Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria, SMEDAN, indicate that we have about 37 million micro, small, and medium enterprises in Nigeria. That's excluding 3 states in the Northeast that were not surveyed at the time. And of this, 36 million of it fall under the micro enterprises. Access to finance has dominantly been cited by businesses as one of the biggest challenges to setting up or operating at scale. So to what extent do you buy into this, and what are the new solutions aside the collateral-driven option? Kamal. Gentlemen, you make use of the microphones by your side.
Good morning, everyone. I think this is a deliberate setup by Cliff. I don't know why he has chosen to start this way, because as quite a number of people in the room are aware, Helios Investment Partners actually, is a private equity firm. By definition, we play primarily in the equity space, although we do have a credit fund, and we will talk about that, I guess, in the course of today. But more important also is the fact that given the size of our fund, the last one we raised was $1.1 billion about 3 years ago. Given the size of that fund, we, in a sense, are constrained to do the larger investment. So typically our minimum investment would probably be about $30 million, which I guess sort of puts us out of the SME range, to put it mildly. But having said that, it is also in our interest to see the development of the SME space, because again, this is sort of, it's in a sense a feeder to future investments that we will look to make. For example, one of the things you often hear, said in the private equity community is the dearth of investable opportunities in Nigeria and in Africa broadly. And again, we will talk about how to sort of our own thoughts around how to improve investability of opportunities. That's just by way of background. The issues of SME funding, whether you're talking about capital, debt or equity capital, is something that, quite frankly, I'm pretty certain everybody in this room is very, very aware of. So whether we're talking about issues around sort of the whole thing around providing the need to provide collateral and so on and so forth, these are issues, or the very high interest rates and whatever. These are issues that everybody in this room is quite familiar with. What I think we have not done sufficient justice to is addressing the underlying issues that have created this problem. I don't think there's any benefit in going over and over sort of the problem, as it were. I mentioned last year that I've been sort of like involved in a sense, either as a spectator or participant in things like Vision 2020, Vision 2010, and so on. So for many years, we've been speaking about these issues. Okay, I think what we should try and do this morning is try and understand exactly how we can have practical solutions to these fundamental issues that have been serving as a stumbling block to this. I think we'll be best served if we actually spend a bit of our time doing this.
Thank you, Kamal. I think we'll really escalate this to other areas, but we just want to have your opening statement. Like, the discussion will not be concentrated on the panel per se. We shall get the buy-in of the audience at the appropriate time, because we have the opening perspectives, 5 minutes from each. We'll have 45 minutes discussion, within which we'll welcome some questions from the audience. So you can make your jottings. Whatever questions you want to ask at the appropriate time, we'll guide you on how to do that. Then we'll have closing comments for 30 minutes, 5 minutes for each of the participants, and have summary of this. Now, let's get Tony to come in here before we go to the Chief Executive Officer of EcoBank. Tony, the development bank has come in place, and we know that it's meant to mitigate the challenges we have with huge interest rates and all that. Let's have your experience about access to capital looking at where you stayed in Kenya and some other countries in Africa, working as the former managing director of EcoBank. Can you share that experience with us?
Okay, thank you very much, Cliff. Let me first start by thanking the Nigerian Economic Summit group for this opportunity to talk about TBN and what we're going to do. First and foremost, like you rightly said, this issue of debt capital for the micro, small, and medium enterprise has been an issue over a long time. And the setting up of Development Bank of Nigeria, a bank strictly focused on that segment, is meant to address some of these issues. The Development Bank of Nigeria has three broad mandates to meet. First is to provide lending credits to these micro, small, and medium enterprises through financial institutions. The second aspect, of course, is to build capacity, again, for the financial institutions to encourage them to lend to that segment. And the third part of the mandate is also provide partial credit guarantee where funding is not the issue, but risk sharing with the financial institutions to ensure that they actually lend to that segment of the market. So those are the broad mandate of Development Bank of Nigeria. And how is Development Bank of Nigeria going to address this? It's principally a wholesale bank setup, and that means it's going to be working through financial intermediaries because they have all the structures, they have all the relationships with the micro, small, and medium enterprises. They already know how to lend to them, but the issue is we need to provide additional funding to be able to cover some of those gaps in that area. And for Development Bank of Nigeria, the focus essentially is to provide longer-term funds, which has been a major issue for this segment of the market. If you look at all these markets you've mentioned, talking about other parts of Africa, a lot of them too have moved ahead in terms of providing longer-term funding. You had mentioned, talked about Kenya. Most MSMEs that are able to borrow money at longer terms, and essentially able to plan for the long term, which is lacking in this market. So the gap that needs to be filled in Nigeria, the gaps that DBN has come into fill to ensure that those long-term funds are available and ensure that micro, small, and medium enterprises are able to plan for long-term on a sustainable basis.
Well, to ensure that those long-term funds are available and on a long-term basis, we'll graduate from that because currently, when we talk about the banks, what comes to mind is high interest rates. We talk about interest rates at between 20 and 30%. And of course, a whole lot of banks has been coming with certain initiatives to ensure that they make it easy for businesses to have access to capital. My question goes to the Group Chief Executive Officer of EcoBank, Mr. Ade Ayeyemi. What can the banks do to improve access to capital without all the encumbrances that affect micro, small, and medium enterprises from the perspective of EcoBank?
Thank you very much, and I also would like to thank Nigerian Economic Summit Group for giving us opportunity to participate in this conversation. It is important to note that capital is not demanded for its own use. It's demanded to fund an idea. And therefore, our small and medium-scale enterprises must have idea, and that idea must have a business model with a profit equation that ensures that idea is profitable. Either a private equity firm, a venture capital, or even mom and pop. When you ask for money, they will ask you the question, what do you want to do with it? And if you do it, will you be able to return my money? So we have to start from the macro situations. Are our companies profitable? So the companies have to be profitable. We'll spend a lot of time discussing infrastructure. All of these things are linked. If a small-scale enterprise comes in and he wants to borrow money or needs capital, and the first thing is to buy generator and all those stuff, then that means he will not be able to generate enough return and nobody will provide capital. Let's be clear, that is the first thing we need to solve from a macro point of view. The second thing we need to solve is our macro variables in terms of core inflation and co needs to come to the level that companies can actually get profitable businesses done here. If the inflation is at 17% and nobody will put money in a company that generates less than 17%, even if it is mom and pop. Nobody would do that. So that means that sends a binding constraint to start with on where the SME or large company or anybody can borrow money. If the federal government of Nigeria is borrowing at 17%, I'm sure only Tony of Development Bank can lend to a small company at less than the rate at which the federal government of Nigeria is prepared to borrow money. And once he starts doing that, that means the development bank will not have a lifespan that is more than 5 years, because it will soon exhaust its capital. Nobody will be able to pay back. Thirdly, part of the challenges around capital, because we talk about cost of capital, but you need to look at the constraints, is the question of how do people pay back, and if they're going to pay back, if they don't pay back, how can banks or other people actually take over the company? If the process is cumbersome, capital will be limited. How do people create wealth? Most places, the household wealth is registered in properties. The properties in our countries is evidenced by CFO. If the CFO process is cumbersome, and if the transfer mechanism incurs incremental costs, then people will not be willing to lend against that as collateral. If the process of foreclosure that goes to our court system takes almost forever to get resolved, then people will not come in originally. You asked the question about other countries. EcoBank is present in 40 countries. Our responsibility as a bank is to convert the vision and dreams of people of this part of the world into reality, and we want to continue to be able to do that. However, if I go to Benin Republic, inflation in Benin Republic is 2%. So I can lend at 8%. Okay? In Benin Republic, Cotonou, just across the border. Just across the border. If inflation here is 17%, that is my starting point. Okay? So we have to remember that the responsibility of a bank is to take your money. You have to look at two sides. One is the loan, one is the deposit. As a banker, my core responsibility is to the depositors, who gives me money when they can work, with the hope that I will manage it properly, that when they can no longer work, the money will still be there. If I lend it recklessly, the money will no longer be there, and the trust of society in planning for a better future by saving will be broken. Remember, every investment at the macro level generates its origination from savings. Savings is what will transform the investment. If we break the trust by lending recklessly, nobody will be willing to save. So all of us as a society needs to contribute to get the cost of capital down. If we all do that, then you will see it's important that we get the cost of capital down, but all of us need to contribute. The banking system is a key player. EcoBank is a key player. We are ready to play our part, but it has to be in concert with all the other participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Capital, he says, is meant to satisfy higher ends, fund an idea. And that says that it is not necessarily an end in itself, but a means to satisfying an end, isn't it? Thank you very much. Let's go to Nasir Yamama. Nasir Yamama, he has a very interesting resume. When we talk about this personality, he was selected amongst the 50 global entrepreneurs for Massachusetts Institute of Technology Global Entrepreneurship Boot Camp, and currently he just came back from Forbes 30. That's 30 most successful and enterprising entrepreneurs. And you started up from nowhere, and you are there up there. We want to share that experience, the startup experience, getting to where you are, and you're being recognized internationally. So would you want to give us insight into how you managed to navigate to the top?
Thank you, Cliff. Well, first of all, it hasn't been all rosy. And it did start from zero to here. And it's been quite an exciting journey. But this is important. I'm quite delighted to be here, sitting, among very experienced minds in not only Nigeria, but Africa and the whole global business atmosphere, if you like. I'm benefiting a lot, and hearing what Mr. Ayemi said now just took me, down memory line. Verdant started as an idea. I had an idea to help farmers produce more, earn a better living, and to solve the food security issue that we're facing. And it started with, providing the necessary information that farmers need to farm better, to also availing this information across the entire value chain so that whatever stakeholder is in the agricultural value chain will be able to, put in the necessary best to achieve the food production that we need to get out of all the problems that we face because of lack of adequate food production. And it's been nearly 3 years now, and it's going quite great. And a lot of farmers are joining us, and a lot of other stakeholders of the agricultural value chain are also using our technologies to further enable agriculture. Regarding the hassles, which I guess would be the elephant in the room of capital, Verdant was fortunate to have gained a bunch of grants to start, but that does not make us oblivious of the plight of the Nigerian entrepreneur, which I myself have been through and I'm still going through. So for instance, one of the major things that we try to solve is access to finance for farmers. Now this is an incredibly funny irony because in our office, one time my team and I were discussing and we realized that we are trying to help farmers find funding and then we are grappling with funding. And our only crime is that we are a startup. We're too small for the bank to look at us. We're too small for us to be bankable. Mr. Ayemi once again said something about, the idea being fundable, right? The business, being able to bring profit. And, the sort of margins to failure, so the sort of risklessness of it all. So the idea is if you're big, if you have something on ground, collateral-wise, money-wise, traction-wise, of course every bank will fund you. And perhaps that's because you'll be able to afford the exorbitant interest rate that is put. But then, does that mean that you should not dream big, you should not solve big problems just because you're too small? I hope I get answers today, and I'm here to make sure I check that, right?
Thank you, Nasri, and we'll still come back to you in a moment. Because we're talking about new solutions. And now we have somebody that has continued to play a role in that direction. Kamal, you've been in this, and both in the area of retail and consumer products, telecom, media, technology, financial institutions, and what have you, cutting across 25 countries. And this is a very interesting experience. Can you throw more light on what private equity, venture capital, and possibly extending to the capital market could bring on the table in times of access to capital for businesses?
Thank you very much. Actually, I think Mr. Yamama's point, submission is actually a good place to actually start from because he's in the trenches, he's facing, sort of like practical problems. The African landscape, the Nigerian landscape, apart from the generic issues around equity, we have our own very peculiar challenges here, and it's important to speak to solutions around them. Sama mentioned one particular word, which is the risklessness, as it were, of it. If there's one thing that I mean, in my mind, outside of trying to address the macro type issues, which we will not solve overnight, is for an entrepreneur to spend a lot of time and put in a lot of effort into thinking about how to de-risk their proposals, as it were, to de-risk the opportunities that they are presenting. And I'd like to mention a couple of things around this. What is, as Mr. Ayemi pointed out, what is an entrepreneur, what is a lender or a provider of capital most afraid of? It is whether or not his money will come back, right? One thing that we have seen work is being able to provide some sort of arrangement or some sort of vehicle that provides, in a sense, I won't quite call it a guarantee, but that provides some sort of assurance that at the very least, I will not lose my shirt if I invest or if I advance money to you. Some of the sort of like things that we have worked with, for example, are concepts like, without getting too technical, things like equity-linked notes. Essentially, some sort of assurance that, look, yes, this is an equity investment. However, I assure you that at the very minimum, you will get X back from this. It gives people comfort. Don't forget the overriding word is de-risking. We must make the risk less or at least acceptable to the investor. So that's one thing. Another thing that I think we need to spend a lot of time about to de-risk it is improving the chances of success of the venture or the opportunity. And one of the critical ways of doing that, which we don't seem to pay enough attention to, is ensuring that the technical capabilities that are brought to bear to that opportunity are reassuring or improve the chances of success, as it were, of the opportunity. So what people do, for example, all these things about, sort of like forming technical partnerships and what have you, is extremely critical to us in that world. We want to be sure that what you're saying you're going to do, you actually either have the ability to do it or you can access the capabilities to make it happen. Beyond the fact that you're passionate about something or you're really interested in something, it's just bringing that assurance that yes, all of that, but also either I have a technical partner or I have somebody who's done this for 30 years or 40 years. It's amazing how, unfortunately, people, think passion can override sheer ability. The truth is, it's passion plus. And then we would listen. That's the reality, and it's something we need to think about. A third aspect of it, this is not so much to do with risk. It's actually making, presenting an investable opportunity. There's something I learned from a mentor of mine. He said, do not ever try to divert the flow of money. Try and stand in the flow of money, okay? You need to think about what does the investor want to invest in, and try and create a vehicle that's appropriate. Very often people are blinded by sort of their dreams and what have you, and they don't think about it. And I'll be guilty of this. I've been an entrepreneur as well in the past. I've been guilty of this. I'm so excited. I'm so in love with my idea. I'm not thinking, what does the investor actually want to invest in? Okay, and I think it's important, for example, so in your field, to think about how do you make this a more investable opportunity? For example, is it that investors want something of scale? Is there a way to aggregate this opportunity as opposed to presenting individual opportunities? And the reverse of it as well, where somebody wants to get investment into like 10 different ideas and nobody's interested because it's like, there's so much opportunity for leakage between the good performing and the underperforming opportunities. And therefore, is to say, look, which ones are actually attractive to investors? Can you carve it out and present this as something that people can invest in? The bottom line of all I'm saying, essentially, is it's very important. Stand in the investor's eyes and think about how can I make this less risky for him? And how can I make this more interesting a proposition or more compelling a proposition for him? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kamal. We're talking about de-risking high-impact projects and all that, standing in the investor's eye. You just have to say, what does this investor need? How can I draw him to my side? That's exactly what he's talking about. And especially provision of public infrastructure in the area of government loans, insurance, credit guarantee initiatives, and all that. Then creating a more conducive, let me come to Ayemi, because you've been in the system for quite some time, and you're quite experienced talking about way out of, out of challenges, de-risking and all that. So creating a more conducive operating environment to attract significant level of capital flows, having in mind the issue of de-risking high impact projects. What would be your perspective?
So, and I will start with examples. So you go to Kenya. Kenya is known for producing tea. It's about the largest tea exporting country in the world. How do they get capital? The tea is produced by individuals, small companies, but they come together into an association, Kenya Tea Development Authority. It's a cooperative, and that cooperative, they can borrow money less than the interest rate available to the government of Kenya, because they focused. It's an association. We know what they do, and it's privately owned, but they can borrow money at less than the interest rate available to the government of Kenya. Then you go to producers of flowers. As a cluster of companies, they've been able to come together, they share resources, and therefore the certainty of being able to, they get the advantage of being big companies, though they're individuals, into small companies. The entity that can borrow money at the cheapest rates across West Africa is Ghana Cocoa Board. Ghana Cocoa Board borrows money at not up to 25% of the cost available to the government of Ghana. And it is to, again, the money is to be used to finance the growers of cocoa on an annual basis. They get about $1.2 billion, between $1.2 and $1.8 billion, depending on the price of cocoa, and they can get that done. So in our own situation, what we need to start thinking about is, what are we known for? How do we bring those companies together in an association? Whether it is the association of printers in Surulere that comes together and they can approach government and get power production, and they can have their own embedded power, so power is no longer an issue. People know that that is their market. Once we know that they're coming together, and because they are in a cooperative, maybe there's 100 of them in a cooperative, they become self-reinforcing, they actually police themselves, and therefore they can get access to capital and access to finance. And whatever infrastructure is provided then ensures that printing in Surulere, and I don't know whether it's printing in Surulere, but we can pick anything, rice production, printing in Surulere, tobacco production, whatever we want to pick. Once we can bring, de-risking means if you bring people together, you create that scale. And if we create that scale, then more and more people are willing to give capital. Now, and as we go forward, ideas, if you bring ideas, people bank ideas, not your collateral. Because if the collateral is that good, you will not go bankrupt in the first instance. And by the time I get the collateral, it's not useful. So banks don't bank collateral, they bank ideas. And the ideas has to start with, what do you want to do? Who are you selling it to? What is the price? What is your competitive advantage? Why should people buy from you? Those things are much more powerful than my father donated a property to me in Surulere and therefore give me money. That doesn't work. Because if that's what it is, then we're going to be limited by the amount of money you can get. When you put your ideas, apart from scaling and partnering with other people, talk to, why should people buy from you? Why? Who are the people there before? Don't say you want to do tailoring. Okay, now I love tailoring because, in my youth I used to see people. You see, I want to do tailoring. These are the people I'm going to sell to. All these bankers need shirts. They are buying their shirts from TM Lewis and all of those places. I can do mine that is as good, I can supply to those places. So you need to have the idea. You need to then have the competitive advantage you have and how you are going to make money. Because it's when you make money that the provider of capital will make money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think he went holistic, then narrowed it down to Nigeria, talking about the Kenyan example, Ghanaian example, the role of cooperative, pulling them together. Nigeria, what are those areas, what are we known for? What are players in those areas? How can we come together in order to de-risk the challenges that could affect our access to capital? And of course, he talked about ideas, opportunities, and wealth. These are a motto of some of the businesses. We talk about when you have ideas, you have to crave for opportunities, and when you tap into the opportunities, you have wealth running after you. And the banks will be coming to you. Now, let's go to Development Bank of Nigeria, where Tony Obanachi is talking about. Reaching 36 million micro, small, and medium enterprises is one of the mandates of Development Bank of Nigeria, which you said will be on a single digit. And we know that operation of micro, small, and medium enterprises sometimes is informal, not formalized. What are the opportunities that are open to them, given their present status? Because do you have any leeway of, because the issue of collateral here has continued to be an inhibition. And I know interacting with you over time, you said, well, that is a way out of it. Would you want to give us insight in that direction?
Thank you very much. Again, I didn't talk about single digits, so don't, let's take that out of context. So let's have that clearly on the table. Single digit, like you said, the macro itself had to lend. You know, if you want to run a sustainable business, you can't run away from the macro environment you are operating. And DBN is set to run a sustainable business. We have tried to avoid the mistakes of the past, where you come out with intervention funds, they dry out, and there's no sustainability. So one of the key things DBN is doing differently is to ensure that you run a sustainable business over time. But back to your question, if you look at that segment, in the micro, for example, how are they being served in terms of debt equity? Most of the microfinance institutions physically focus on the micro. They learn the act of lending to the micro businesses. They've perfected the interaction, they know the business, they tend to lend to them. But they have major issues with funding. They have capacity issues in terms of funding. So while they have those customers, a lot of people come in trying to get funding to them. They don't have the capacity. So DBN, for example, is coming in to provide that capacity for them to ensure that they are able to lend to more. The second aspect, again, a lot of complaint about the short tenor nature of this funding, which is trying to stifle a lot of micro businesses. Usually the lending is about 30 days turnaround time, which, if you know to a great extent, is quite stifling for them. Now, where you give them funding and give them longer term to be able to repay, that enables them to work towards a cash flow that will make it sustainable for them, and then eventually, of course, to be able to get the interest rates down on an affordable basis. But if you look at the other side, the commercial banks, some of them, a lot of funding in terms of capacity. Funding is not the issue, but it's the issue of risk, all right? And if you talk to most commercial bankers, they will tell you, yes, we know it's a profitable area to go, but the risk there too is also very heavy, just like Ms. Ayemi said. For you to be able to make your project bankable, you go through all this. Now, the Development Bank of Nigeria is also coming to also try to share risk with banks, like I said before. If we're able to share the risk and say, look, yes, you've seen this project is bankable, but you think that the risk is too heavy, then we'll be able to come in there to share them. Now, over time, a lot of institutions, all these MSMEs, you see them, they start business, in the short run, they die. Why? There are so many other microeconomic issues, we'll talk about them when we come to them. But the issue of tenor of funding is a major thing, and that DBN has come in to solve.
Tony, you're leaving one aspect of it. Because I talked about the informal nature of these businesses, and I know that you have a place for them, because when we talk about collaterals, they cannot provide houses and all that. do you have any new mechanism in place to accommodate these people?
Now, if you look at, we're talking about the collateral registry, for example, where you can use movable assets now to secure some of your lending. This was not there before, and that act has now been passed into law. So the operationalization of that, most of these small businesses, they have little things, movable assets they can use as collateral where it becomes necessary. When I talked about capacity building, another issue you find out from a lot of these microfinance institutions, and sometimes even the commercial banks, is ability to be able to lend to some of these businesses on a cash flow basis, right? So that way you don't already, Messiah mentioned the fact that collateral should be a secondary thing. But how do you lend to them? Sometimes, I can tell you, the issue is lack of capacity, understanding the business to be able to lend to them. So DBN2, like I said, the third mandate we have is to say, how do we also provide that capacity to lend so that they're able to lend to these small businesses without necessarily asking for all this collateral.
Okay, let's go to Nasri. Thank you very much, Tony. Nasri, you've had their perspectives to all the questions, and I know that as a startup company, you benefited from funding, outside of the normal banks. Internationally, you can access funds. Online, you can access funds. Would you want to enlighten us along that line on how you could go about it if you are just about starting a business, taking into account that survey shows that you need about 10,000 naira to start a small business, and I beg your pardon, 50,000 to start a small business, and about 10 million if you have to, be on this small level. So give us insight on how you could really access this, how you started and gained insight into that funding.
Okay, now, first of all, I do agree that some of us are a bit overzealous, a bit too passionate about our businesses, and that gets in the way. Most of what the panelists have said is true. As an investor or bank, sometimes you go through very horrendous business plans, and they are basically unfundable. I do agree with all of that, but it is also factual that there are some really outstanding Nigerian entrepreneurs, because here's what I thought about that. How come a few people I know, actually quite a number, are able to get funding outside of Nigeria but cannot do it here? And you and I know that the criteria is even tougher out there as far as, your technical standing is concerned. Why is it that there are, better chances of a Nigerian startup getting funding in San Francisco than in Abuja or Lagos? There's definitely a fundamental problem, not only in the ability of the startup or the entrepreneur to stand, in the way that the investor thinks or where the investor can put their money. Also, their ability to partner with a technical body is kind of sketchy in Nigeria. I'll give you an example. Some of us need to deal with some crucial data. Say weather, for instance. Farmers need weather. I need to get weather for farmers. And of course, there's a very, old sound body in Nigeria that provides weather data, right? So what I'll naturally do is go and partner with them, and then the banks would say, oh, you're credible. But what if I present data that, says rainfall would be, same between a rainforest and, a savanna area in Nigeria from this very credible organization? See, it doesn't add up. Some of us are in fields that are so new that we are the technicality. We have to basically build from the ground up. And if we're not funded, then it's a problem, because we can't get this technical partnership here. Now, thank you. Back to your question, we were able to get funding outside of Nigeria and locally too. The, I think, biggest percentage of funding generated from small and medium enterprises and even the elite startups in Nigeria would be personal, like basically family. a small percentage private equity, and now there's a huge boom of venture capital and angel investing, which is good for us. And what I would ask the NESG is probably to get more angel investors on the platform or VCs so that we can hear that angle, not only the banks, because this is just one section. But I believe there's a bright future.
Was this among the issues, during the conversation at Forbes 30? What was the perspective? Because discussing with you at the background, you said, well, these were part of the issues on how the small and medium enterprises could key into capital.
Absolutely. So at the Forbes 30 Under 30 Summit in Boston, a lot of the conversation, of course, did border around access to capital. So it's actually a universal problem if you look at it. And every country or continent or region is looking at it from their own perspective and addressing it, considering the local sort of unique problems that face them. And I wonder why Nigeria is not doing that. I mean, just because Silicon Valley gets away with, a lot of, VC funding and great things happening there does not mean that Nigeria has to follow the exact track. We can develop our own unorthodox, financing methods, which I'm glad, some of the people here are lending their voices to and are leading organizations that build. But the idea is to actually do it effectively and to push away that stereotype that we're all terrible.
Thank you very much, Nasri. Talking about Nigerians have distinguished themselves internationally in business, no doubt about it. Nominating a Nigerian to be part of the most successful 30 entrepreneurs in the world is not a mean feat. I think we deserve a round of applause for that. On a higher scale, we know that we have a Nigerian too as the most richest man, the richest man in Africa, and internationally ranking in the first digits numbers. That's talking about Dangote. So we have a whole lot. So why is it, easy for entrepreneurs to access capital abroad, and it's so difficult to have that in Nigeria? Looking at the other options available, let me come to Ayemi.
Okay. Thank you. Before I came to EcoBank, I spent close to 28 years in Citigroup. So I can give. It's because we are poor. But let's be, let's be honest about that. Once you know your condition, okay, then you're able to move forward. Okay? I spent my last holiday in Yorkshire, in the UK. And I was in the town of York. York has 200,000 people. The GDP of York is about $8 billion. Okay? I live in Lomé, Togo, with 7.5 million people. The GDP of Lomé, Togo is about $4 billion. We are poor. Once we get that, so if you are in Silicon Valley, we went on a road show for one country in Africa. They were trying to do bond in the country is Ghana. We were trying to do bond. So somebody walked into the room, we're doing presentation, we need this money and all that. And one of the investors came to the room and said, where is Ghana, Guyana, which country is this? So one of my colleagues in the room said, Ghana in West Africa, they beat USA in football. And the person said, they beat USA in football? $10 million, I'm okay. Now, as a proportion of the money he has, $10 million is nothing. So when you go out and you say $10 million, honestly, it's nothing. But as a country, $10 million for that bond for Ghana was a lot of money, and that's a country. So you ask the question why we can get the money outside, we can't get it here. However, as a country, we cannot develop and become a big country on handouts. We have to create the local conditions for wealth creation that allows our savings to be transmuted into investment. So we need, at the initial stage, to be an attractive destination for the foreign money to come in, because the bridges and the airports and most of the infrastructures have been built in those places. The people are living longer, and therefore they are saving. And therefore the investment opportunity for those countries are no longer as attractive as ours. So there is investment money that can come here, because the bridges here have not been built, and the roads have not been constructed, and the airports are still inadequate. So there is money that can flow to this part of the world, but we have to compete with the rest of the world. Now, talking to how to handle the small and medium scale enterprises, I think it's, instead of government providing liquidity for them, it's better to actually provide credit guarantee. Because credit guarantee is provided to small business associations, even in the United States, that allows banks to say, okay, I'm going to lend because I'm now taking a government risk, and I'm not going to provide lending to this. And it also makes it easier for other people to provide capital. If you look at our country today, our capital market, again, is very small. As a percentage of GDP, it's not up to 10%. The capital market cap, even in South Africa, is 3 times. Even in Kenya, it's much larger as a percentage of GDP. So capital market as a place to actually source money is not there. And that is why, if you look at the assets available, asset classes available to us as somebody that wants to save is you put some money in the stock market, you don't like it, you put it in T-bills, and then you start chasing housing. And that is why the valuation of a housing is actually very high, because that's the only place people can save. So there is some money that can flow to you. Our capital market needs to be able to make that access easy and profitable. The government needs to, instead of providing capital, needs to see whether they can provide guarantees for credit for people like yourself. And we also need to have a small business associations, so that things like, how do you prepare your feasibility studies? How do we make sure that the governance process works properly? Government can provide that to you. Institutions within government can provide that to you to create conditions for success. And once the condition for success has been created, you'll be able to see a lot of capital flowing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Looking at Nigeria as a poor nation from development indicators, and of course the need to enhance the capacity of Nigerian capital markets, standing currently at about 10% to GDP, and the need for government to create an environment that will spur investors, to embrace what we have on ground, to create wealth and ensure inclusive growth. Now, we look at the options of the new solutions. We're still talking about that. I come back to Kamal. The private equity grew from 3 general partners managing about $75 million in 2003 to 14 fund managers controlling more than $2 billion. But in South Africa, the statistics are quite startling, because South Africa had 11.6 billion. Between 2007 and 2015, the African Private Equity and Venture Capital Association reported 311 private equity deals valued at 6.1 within South Africa. What are these options? Looking at private equity, looking at mutual funds, looking at crowdfunding, and this other of it, he just talked about the capacity of capital market. What really can we do in that area to ensure that we expand it to the benefit of micro, small, and medium enterprises?
Thank you. So there are two sides to that question. One is sort of how do you even grow the capacity of the sort of this, call it alternative asset managers class. I think actually what is interesting about that, I'm very optimistic about that space in the sense that we're seeing a lot more really talented young managers, potential GPs as you call them, coming up and getting funded. So I'm aware that, right now in the pipeline, there's probably about a number of people looking to raise in the region of about $1 billion. In various sort of like private equity funds. And these are really, really smart, talented Nigerians. So I'm super optimistic. And also just listening to the traditional providers of funding or investment into that space. The general outlook for that is really quite optimistic. So that seems to be doing quite well. The other side of it, however, this is where I then put the burden on the investors now. The other side of it is actually developing that capacity to properly evaluate and to properly develop investable opportunities. Remember, when I was talking earlier on, I put the onus on the entrepreneurs and the business owners or the promoters to ensure that they are presenting investable opportunities. It is not a one-sided thing. I think this is where I will then take my own community to task in a very big way. That is the investor community. Both the banks and the non-bank financial institutions, I think very often we're doing a very poor job of actually creating investable opportunities where we're waiting for well-baked investments. We bring the same criteria that we see in the Western world. We want to see 5 years of positive cash flow. We want to see a management team in place. We don't want any environmental liabilities and so on and so forth. With all due respect, in Africa, you'll be smoking something very nasty if you are waiting for all of those things to be in place. It's not going to happen, right? What we then need to do, as I said, as an investor, as managers of this particular asset class, is to invest time and resources in developing the capabilities to develop those opportunities in a couple of ways. I'll give you an example. We recently closed a deal that we worked on for 3 years. Okay, I distinctly remember working on this deal for 3 years. We just closed the deal around about April. It's actually, sort of our first deal in that space. What did we have to do? We had to manage everything from, this is us investors. We could just show up and say, we will not put money in this thing except blah, 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 blah. But we realized that, look, this is a potentially valuable opportunity, okay? This is good for the country, and it will make us money. Let's face it, and we'll be able to achieve superior returns. So, what are the sort of things that we had to work on? And this is something I think that should serve as a bit of a case study for us going forward. We had to deal with regulatory issues. This was a company that had not been very regulatory. That had not been very compliant in terms of regulation and so on and so forth. We had to work on cleaning up sort of like the whole regulatory compliance aspect of that business. We had to work, obviously, in line with that, we had to work on the governance side. We had to work on this thing I talked about, this technical partnership. This was a business that we felt, it had great potential, but did not have the right sort of capabilities. We had to work on finding a technical partner, a European technical partner, bringing them on board, and we had to form a relationship with them and solidify that relationship, and then come up with a plan around this opportunity. We had to work on the funding, the working capital requirements for the business going forward. All the kind of things that you would normally take a look at the deal and like, forget it, we cannot invest in this. Now, this is something that I think, my friends in the banking sector are also just as guilty of this. You have a checklist and you think you can just tick through the checklist. Well, you just keep waiting or just park your money in T-bills for the foreseeable future. So the point being, the onus also lies on the investor community to spend a lot of time, sort of like cleaning up the more promising opportunities, see them for what they are, and invest the time to actually get them to that stage. Of course, it comes at a price, but the returns are absolutely worth it, and that's what we're looking forward to.
Thank you, Kamal. Still talking about investable opportunities, and the time in closing a deal running to 3 years could be quite, discouraging. Need to focus on regulatory issues of governance, issues of technical partnership to enhance capacity and capabilities. And talking about funding options and all that. Let me come to Tony of Development Bank of Nigeria. Currently, your basic takeoff fund is at $1.3 billion. And looking at the size of Nigeria and the challenges that we have, because with 37 million micro, small, and medium enterprises. That is just one part of area that you need to tackle. You have the area of manufacturers and all others, doing business. What are you doing to expand your funding base, through collaboration with other international development agencies?
Thank you, Clive. First, before I talk about, let me just put a challenge through to Kamal and his team. I think part of the problem we also have on the private equity side, if you look at the percentage of funding from outside Nigeria itself, most of them comes out a lot of funding of the private equity firms themselves. Where do you get your funding from? So a lot of things we need to set up. How do we also raise funding from Nigeria? If you look the experience in Kenya, for example, most of the private equity firms, local private equity firms, raise the funding locally. So you understand the terrain, you understand the business. Some of these requirements you're talking about in terms of funding might go good. Secondly, you also have a lot of people come together as associations to raise funds locally. So I think on the private equity side, how do we increase the percentage of funding, raising funds locally to be able to fund local enterprises might be a major thing you need to do to run up. For DBN, the takeoff grant funding, like you said, is $1.3 billion, over $1 billion over a period of time. But in the long term, we'll also be able to raise money through issuance of bonds, also working with some of our development partners, also reach some other soft funds across. But the business model is ensure that at the medium to long term, we're able to have that track record to be able to also raise funds locally to be able to continue to finance our business expansion.
Well, thank you. Well, you're expanding. We hope that you get to a level where you could compete with IMF, World Bank, and other development agencies to be able to really tackle the challenges we have on ground. Let me come to Nasri. After Nasri, we will be opening the floor to get some questions, if the indication I'm getting is anything to go by. Well, Nasri, you've had the perspectives of these personalities, and as a young entrepreneur representing millions of entrepreneurs in Nigeria, you talked about the mindset and the primary things to do. Would you want to escalate this to the appreciation of those who are having challenges, have this fear that, well, we cannot get the right funds at the appropriate time?
Rephrase it, please.
I said, what would you advise young micro entrepreneurs, because you said that Nigeria has the capacity and the funding should not be the challenge. What should they be doing at this time after listening to this discussion and sharing your experience with them?
Well, absolutely. I myself have learned a few things, and I feel like every entrepreneur, before going for investment, needs to, have a clear-cut idea of not only, the advancement of the business in terms of, making profit for themselves, but technically sounding, right to the investor. So these are tiny things that we might not consider, to be the thing. If your idea, for instance, if you're solving hunger, then yeah, everybody should invest, right? But that's not the case. You need to have a solid business case. Your finance has to be right. Your business plan has to be, sound. And a lot of entrepreneurs run into the, problem of not complying to those things. And clearly, without that, you cannot move forward. So the energy is important, but also it's important to get things right from the start on.
Would you think it's right to consult experts at that takeoff level? Because you might have ideas, and you don't know when the opportunity will come. Because some people need to enlighten you, put you through to watch out for this and that, and what step to take from time of developing those ideas.
So in my experience, the very first business plan I ever got written, I got a lot of help. No one can do it alone. So you just have to reach out to the right people. I was opportune to go to the British Library and find a whole business clinic, which a few of you have mentioned. There's need for capacity development. So perhaps if the banks are tired of seeing entrepreneurs who come with weak presentations, weak business plans, they probably need to invest in educating entrepreneurs on how to get these things. And there's a myriad of available free content on this beautiful thing called the internet that entrepreneurs could find and could build from.
Well, Nasri Yamama is talking about building your capacities, that you must not limit yourself to possibly passing through the university. There are a whole lot of ideas on the net that could expand your knowledge and open new doors for you to key into opportunities. Ade Ayeyemi, the Group Chief Executive Officer, will want to make an input here.
Thank you. I think the point he made that the banks need to participate in creating the capacity is important, and I think as a member of the formal society, we will participate in making that happen. The importance of the various ministries of trade and industry to see the role as enabling the small and medium-scale enterprises from a capacity point of view to support and assist them is something that we need to make sure happen. We also need to make sure the businesses get formalized. Over the weekend, I went to my barber to get a haircut. And I asked the person, how do I pay? And I saw the master pass of EcoBank there, and I wanted to pay with my phone. And the person said, no, you can't pay with your phone, give me cash. And I said, why should I need to give you cash? He said, because and because. Okay, anyway, ultimately I gave him cash. And I said to myself that this person collected cash. If he comes to me and he say, Ade, we have a problem, I want to expand my business, can you give me money? And I would say, how much do you make? The guy cannot even demonstrate how much he makes. So we need to figure out how we formalize that, and some of these technologies that people are preferring cash to actually have auxiliary benefits on enabling you to formalize your business. I think that's something as a people and as a country we need to try, and because when you remove cash, you de-risk your business, but you're also able to showcase the transactions that you do, and that enable the banks to be able to bank you. If we believe that the SME is good and we need to provide long-term equity to them, then we need to look at what is our largest pool of savings as a country today is in our pension scheme. And our pension scheme then needs to say, okay, is it 5% that we're going to allocate here? Is it what percent? Then collectively, all of us will be making a bet on the small and medium-scale enterprises with the understanding that if it doesn't return, it is our pension that will go away. Because it's no longer just the bank or the bank deposits, right? We need to be able to put our money where we are putting our mouth, right? And say, okay, we believe in this, we need to provide equity, and we need to say the pension can actually make an allocation instead of them chasing the stock market that is not there, or chasing the bond or those that are not there. They can also make an allocation. So if we do formalization of the businesses, the using technology, allocation of the pension fund as part, letting the ministries actually do the job of providing support, capacity creation support for those small and medium-scale enterprises will go a long way. So that then we are beginning to make a good way. Ultimately, We need to go back to the fundamentals of what makes our society. Savings, when I grew up in the village, is through the Esusu culture, where people come together and donate money every week, and at the time when they need it, then they're able to use it. We need to figure out how to scale that up, because not every person in the remote village in Nigeria will be able to go to California to raise capital. Some of them will be able to, one or two, but we need to also try and find the local things that is grounded in our social structure historically and figure out how to scale that and bring it to the local. We were as good in terms of technology with cutlass and hoes, but when all of those become tractors and combined harvesters, we did not migrate. So we need to figure out how to get those things done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Still talking about the local option, the Isusus, and the need to formalize our businesses, the need for financial inclusion using technology to drive your business, and the place of the pension fund, and of course the role the ministries should play in building capacities and all that. Now the floor will be open for us to indicate and ask questions or maybe make an input as a case may be. Abiola, please, can you try to coordinate that? Okay, you one, let's have 1, 2, 3. Please know your numbers. The person at the back, 4, 5, 6, 7 for now. Once we mention your numbers, we please start. Number 1.
Thank you, the moderator.
You can say who you're directing the question to.
Professor Shegun Ajibola. Funds have been mopped up, sterile, sort of, with the central bank. The same government is borrowing, crowding out the private sector, overheating the system because of deficit budgeting, and rate is approaching 20% for Treasury bill. Is there no major disconnect, economic dislocation, occasioned by this practice? So, because if we are saying there are no funds available for fundable projects in all the segments of the economy, and we still have this challenge from the public sector side, is there no disconnect? That's my number 1 issue. Number 2, I had wanted to raise the issue, but it's partially clarified. That are we talking about access to finance or access to capital? Because most times, cost of capital is different from cost of funds. And that dichotomy is in the nature of the kind of funds you can access. So I was thinking, we wanted to emphasize the area of equity participation, looking for hardcore funding that can support small to medium businesses and other segments of the economy. But we have used both interchangeably, access to finance, access to capital. But whatever is the case, whether we are talking about finance or capital, we should also not treat the issue of cost in isolation. We've made that mistake over and over in this environment. We can't treat cost of capital or cost of finance in silos. It's a basket of problems. In a recent survey, cost of funding happened to be the number 6 problem of small-scale enterprises. Who is addressing number 1 to 5 problems? If we assess we keep talking about the number 6 problem. Even if we solve the number 6 problem and we leave number 1 to 5 problems, we will still be back to square one.
Thank you very much.
These are the issues.
Thank you. Number 2.
Hi, thank you. I'm Obinna Ukachukwu and I work for Hijia HMO. In the past, I think 3 or 4 weeks, we've actually been trying to crunch numbers to see how we can help the health sector get access to funding, probably because the key players in Hijia now are financial people, inclined people. Now, I would like to be very real, like Ayeyemi was when he said we're a poor country. There is really no incentive for any commercial bank to lend to any small-scale business for any reason. The cost of the risk-free rate in Nigeria today is upwards of 18%, 17%. That's the government borrowing rate. So the foregone benefit is just too much. So even if we debate it from now till next year, there is nothing the commercial banks will actually, there's nothing that would motivate them to actually lend to these businesses. Now let's think about, now going back to Yamama, when he said, think about our unique environment and how we can now forge forward. At the danger of sounding simplistic, I'd like us to reflect on this. The commercial banks thrive on competition, brand competition, where these profitability competition were the most profitable. Why not bring that competition into play as regarding SMEs? If the government decides today to take the risk of lending to SMEs and says, commercial banks, you have XYZ funds, lend. I'm going to actually rank you based on your performance. That's your performance, your NPL rates for SMEs that you've lent to, and the kind of businesses you've lent to. And I'll publish it every month. Then let's see the commercial banks actually race to the top. Just think about it. If we take the risk as a government and allow the commercial banks now put in their expertise to do this.
Thank you very much. Well, actually, I'd like to call your attention to the fact that we are discussing access to capital, looking at new solutions. We already know the position of the commercial banks and what influences their lending rate at between 20 and 30%. But we are just looking at new ways that micro, small, and medium enterprises and other businesses could key into to raise capital. So take that in mind when you are making your contribution. Number 3, please. Number 3 is there.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Odun Emasialu, and I am the chairman of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, Abuja branch, and also the MD of Interior Woodwork Limited. Now, we've said so much, and I think we need to move forward into solutions, which is what I think is most important. Now, I must say that I've been so comfortable here in the last 2 days. Everything looks normal, and I'm not afraid to go back to my office, which is the real world. Well, I hope I'll be able to readjust. Now, we'll find out like what the person before me said. There's a lot of comfort, let me say, with those of us in this room. The financial institutions here will actually be comfortable and profitable lending to both the government and the businesses here. And they really do not need the SMEs. And that is the truth. Like we said from the survey, there are 36 million SMEs, if I got you right, sir, in Nigeria. And we're talking about industrialization and moving forward. Now, is it about strengthening those of us who are here, or reaching out to those who are not here? The 36 million. And that's what we do whenever we gather. Now, if you look at it, these 36 million, this is the real economy. Because they are huge, and they are not here. On this panel, I think we should have had people from NASI and people from Smedan. And we'll hear the reality of the issues. Because most of us in the panel really grew up in this other system. I used to joke that we call ourselves the organized private sector, but we need to address the disorganized private sector. Now, we find out that we have a financing stalemate here, like we have seen. If I am a bank, I will not fund SMEs. I will not, even now, I won't put my money in them.
Your question, please.
Now, no, I'm just making I'm making a comment. Now, interior woodwork, for instance, dropped from 1,000 naira, and we could not borrow, we could not access funds until after 15 years. We're 18 years old, when we had raised the capital. I mean, the asset base to almost 6 to 7 billion. Now, the risk is high in this place. We've heard about de-risking. We cannot de-risk. I am suggesting, just like we have in the agri sector, we have extension workers, there's a need for the creation of a new institution or new intermediaries. Now, the investors are there, and these businesses are there, but nobody will lend to them. What we need to do, I think, is to set up a system, a structure, an institution, intermediary, that can help these institutions to manage these other sectors. For example, fund somebody that has no HR unit, no accounting structure, they can't write a plan, they can't do anything. And we now said, put our checklist for them to come and meet. So we must set up a system where we recruit people, that is my suggestion, like extension workers who will interact with these SMEs and help to manage them and manage the funds of the investors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that lecture. Well, you have to understand there is no way we can bring 37 million micro, small, and medium enterprises here. Good thing you're from Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. And we have NASI, and we have the media that will carry the message beyond this hall. So the interaction is beyond here, even beyond Nigeria. So number 4, please, we just have 1 minute for your comment or question, please. Not more than 1 minute. Number 4.
Good morning. My name is Abimbola Ayeni. I'm the CEO of Binka Palace Nigeria Limited. My question goes to Mr. Okwanachi. Mr. Ayo is asked a question about what is Development Bank doing differently to SME, but I feel I did not get your answer rightly, or I'm not convinced how you answered the question, because we have Bank of Industry and we have other banks, but I want to understand what you're doing differently to SMEs. They'll be able to, complete startups, people who do not have anything and want to do business, have the ideas and need the finances. I want to understand what you're doing differently. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 5. Abimbola, we thank you for that short intervention.
Thank you very much. My name is Oluwaseun Adeomi. Luckily, I'm an entrepreneur, and I probably suffer from what they're talking about. I'm in the printing line, and my question will go to Mr. Adeyemi. I will speak with my experience. 2012, I registered my company, and I was going into printing. Before then, I had been doing printing. Then I went to school outside the country, and I had so much passion for what I was doing back then, and I wanted to continue. The first thing I did was to come up with a business plan, because I had a background in writing business plan. I worked with a consulting firm before then, so I knew how to come up with that. And I studied business studies with my major in marketing, so I knew I had a very good proposal. I walked to the first bank and approached them to help me. The first thing I was told is, you need to run for like 5 years. Let us see your 6 months turnover and everything. I said, no problem, give me, I'll open the account. 6 months, I went back and I showed him. And this is where my point is going. You said that we should come together as cooperatives, as professionals. I moved from that bank because I spoke with the marketer, with my account officer, and it sounded so dumb. I wondered if he ever went to school. I moved from there to another bank, and I encountered the same. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to insult, but I will say why I said so dumb. Now, if I am in a printing line and I'm speaking with a marketer who has no knowledge of printing, who doesn't understand the processes of printing, that's what the processes are in the pre-printing, post, and the printing itself. How do you want me to convince that person that I am true to it? You said I should have technical capacity. Now I have it. But my marketer or account officer doesn't even understand. The second bank, last year, somebody walked into my office. He had studied and checked my turnover and noticed that, oh, this guy does job for MasterCard. I was privy to that based on my own client. Oh, he does job for MasterCard, ARM. Then he should be able to make money. Then he comes to me. My question is, how come banks don't train their marketers to be industry specific? One. Secondly, have we ever thought about owning a part of the small business? In this sense, I mean, I cannot afford an accountant, a proper accountant. And I'm saying, I'm turning over 12 million, 15 million, but I cannot even monitor it because I'm the marketer myself. My staffs cannot do that. They do the technical thing. I'm the one that has to stand there. Is there no way banks can also own, like they do in Malaysia, where you own part of the bank? Maybe you just employ, rather than just keep that marketer out there and give him a ridiculous target. Ask him to go to that place and help them grow the business.
Thank you very much. Well, still talking about experience with banks, and now you are getting new solutions and new options on how to access capital. That's exactly why we are in this very conversation, offering you new opportunities that you can easily key into in the area of private equity, capital market, venture capital, and all that. Number 6.
Hello. My name is Akishola Ale. I work for Nikon Insurance. I think I want to go to the opening statement of the moderator. You talked about how can MSMEs access loans without collateral. I mean, we are talking about 36 million of these micro companies. And given the financial state of the economy right now, we believe that they can actually impact a lot as to the growth of the GDP and the economy, for that matter. And I don't think that issue has been addressed to my satisfaction. And I also want to talk about the issue of capacity building. I thank the gentleman in red tie for what he said they did. That's Helios for a particular client. To invest 3 years building capacity for an organization is very, very sacrificial on your part. But I also know for a fact that Smidan, I believe that's what Smidan was meant to do. And I believe they're also doing it because I've had engagement with Smidan. To the extent to which they are well funded, I don't know. Maybe the government should look into that, and the NES should also collaborate in that regard. But as regards the funding for MSMEs, it was in the media maybe a year or two ago, that about 200 billion was made available through CBN for all these micro enterprises. And I, being an insurance provider, because I also want to provide insurance for the micro sector, I was made to understand that for them to access these funds, they have to go through, the funds will be given through microfinance banks. And now the risk management aspect has been, more or less we're giving over to the microfinance banks, who are supposed to provide collateral or provide security on behalf of the beneficiary of these loans. And I don't know to what extent these microfinance banks have the capacity to provide, the collateral for the micro businesses that they don't even know. Now, that is where my worry is now, because the insurance company will have to come in and say, okay, please provide us cover, credit insurance. And from the analysis that we've done, about 50% default rate exists in this sector. So what can we do to provide to improve the risk so that the default rate will come down to maybe like 10%? I don't think maybe internationally, you guys are well exposed internationally, the default rate shouldn't be more than 10%. I mean, what is the default rate in commercial banks, or the acceptable default rate in commercial banks? Why should the default rate in the micro sector be as high as 50%? What can we do to ensure that we improve the risk in terms of building capacity? And I think this is what area I want you guys to address it. Thank you.
Thank you, Akinshola. We'll now go to the former minister, number 7 in front. This 7. Okay, we'll give you a space, but this is number 7. I was very sure of that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My name is Tokumbo Kayode. I'm doing some work with the Abuja Chamber of Commerce. I practice law too. Now, I think that, we've been talking about funding SMEs all this while. Social economy may be one of the ways we can resolve this. And I will tell you a little story just to buttress this. I know a lady here in Abuja who has a group of about 200 people, some of them teachers, some of them micro business persons. What they do, every month, you contribute. Whatever you can. If it's 5,000 naira, 10,000 is your choice. At the end of every 3 months, you can draw times 10 of what you contribute. So you could actually, if you do 10,000 per month, you could do 100,000, and you go on like that. And the main issue is there's hardly any defaults at all. And within a year or 2 years, you could actually begin to escalate. Is it because banks believe that, and all of us know this, when they give you money, maybe the SME people take it as a dash or part of government largesse. So they don't believe that you will pay back because you may take it as largesse. But check it out. The cost, aside from the interest rate, even the cost of accessing that money is prohibitive. If you have to get a mortgage or get security, you have to pay about 10% to government, stamp duties, registration fees. If it's a limited liability company, you have to pay the cost of the amount, a percentage of the charge, which you register at the Corporate Affairs Commission. So all this overburden the facility and, of course, overwhelm the business person. So I think social economy, where we can actually eliminate all these charges and all these formalities, especially funds you pay to government, because government is also very culpable in this matter, may help us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure Ade Ayemi raised that issue, drawing inference from what obtains in Ghana, Kenya, tea, and cocoa. But we'll still get to that. It ought not to exceed the number.
I'm proud to be 7A. My name is Mr. Obadibo Okonkwo. And I have a question for both Mr. Yamama of NISEL and Mr. Opanachi of Development Bank of Nigeria, DBN. I am a member of the Board of Trustees of the Nigerian Association of Small and Medium Enterprises, NASME. And the chairman is quite right. MSMEs in Nigeria are almost up to 40 million, according to the latest data. But the biggest problem MSMEs face, particularly the micro and the small, is lack of access to affordable finance, even more than power, lack of power. So this forum is extremely important in focusing on this particular problem. Now, MSMEs have only one window, that's development banks, because they don't consider commercial banks as affordable at all. But then the history of DFIs in Nigeria is a very sad one. Where is the Nigerian Industrial Development Bank? Where is the Nigerian Bank for Commerce and Industry? Where is the People's Bank of Nigeria? Where is Nigerian Agricultural Bank? Where is NEFON? They are all dead. For reasons which I'm sure most of you know. So my question to the DBN and the NESL is how, in their own business model, how can they sustain their operations not to die as all these other DFIs did? I'm sure that BOI is doing very well. I mean, they are trying. But it's only a loan. It's very small. What is NESL and DBN going to do differently so that they won't die like the other ones? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, again for making me 7A.
Thank you very much, Oba Okonkwo. Thank you so much. It's of NASI. That will show you that we had representatives cutting across. The first question centered on stakeholders' retreat on TSA and deficit financing. Is there no disconnect? I didn't quite get the name of the contribution you made. Then access to capital and the cost of it. These are the issues raised. I'm sure you made some jottings on all this. Obinna talked about incentive for commercial banks to lend, but we did talk about that too. Odu, if I got it right, of Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, Abuja branch, talked about the 37 million micro, small and medium enterprises, setting up a system or institution to assist micro, small and medium enterprises. First, let's start with Ade. You had all the contributions, and I know you want to key in one of the questions. Okay. Which would you prefer?
Okay, I'll go for the first question that the professor raised on the
disconnect.
On the question of capital stack, whether it is access to finance, access to capital. I think at the end of the day, we're trying to figure out how to fund these small and medium-scale enterprises, whether it is long-term capital, medium-term capital, short-term capital. I'm really indifferent. And most of the small and medium-scale enterprises are indifferent. We need to figure out how to do that, and I think that's what we've been trying to do. The dislocation in the economy, where there was an abrupt change in the behavior of the deposits by the MDAs and government entities from the banking system and suck out a large proportion of deposits that the banks might have lent out longer term, that created dislocation in 2015 and up to now, is something that was unexpected, and I hope something we don't repeat ever often. Because when banks take short-term money and lend it long-term, it's based on historical behavior of the depositors. So I just hope that will not. Now you ask the question, why is there dislocation? It comes back to all of us. The tax to GDP in our country is very low. If the tax to GDP is very low, but we want the government to do everything, then the government are forced to borrow. And when they borrow, we find ourselves in a situation where they are crowding out the private sector. So we need to, at some point, all of us need to figure out, okay, what's going to be our own contribution? If we keep avoiding taxes, then we'll pay it back in interest rates. So if we can pay the taxes, it should be a good thing. I want to respond to the person on the printer, and I will ignore the language, the flowery language of the comment, which is not that important. What is important is that banks and all other providers of capital should also come and become advisors to the companies that they are trying to bank. So, and I take that point, that commercial banks need to, not the marketers only coming to ask for, I want to lend money, or I want to take deposits. We should be able to be advisors to you and send in people that are almost counselors to work with you in being able to develop your business. And I think that's important that all of us as commercial banks need to do. In terms of Printers Association though, if all of you are within the same geographical locale, you can actually, as a startup, you don't need to buy all the printing equipment in one go. I'm from a printing house myself. I know that you may not even have a guillotine to cut the paper. You can go to somewhere and use a guillotine. You may not even have the printer, okay? You can do a lot of, so if you come together within a locale, you can actually share a lot of resources. Those are the things I want to contribute to. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We know that you've well discussed this, and I'm sure my friends have their takeaways from his input. Abimbola asked a question for Okpanachi. What is DBN doing differently to SMEs? And also there was a question on building capacities. I don't know if the Development Bank, is doing something in that direction. Please, Tony.
Thank you very much, Abimbola. I think, let me make some points. First and foremost, we should not pretend that there's one institution that will be able to solve all the funding requirements of SMEs. That's clear. Nowhere in the world that one institution is able to do it. You act as a catalyst to be able to do that. So when you talk about other DFIs, all have to be complementary to be able to do that. DBN doing differently. I'd mentioned earlier on, now there's a huge gap that, as we found out, in terms of the funding needs of that segment, and that is long-term funding. I'll give you an example. DBN, for example, is going to fund projects of up to 10 years, even up to 2 years moratorium, effectively giving you almost 12 years funding, which in this market is not available. So that gives the MSMEs opportunity to be able to plan, so both for investment loans and working capital. So that's quite key. Secondly, I'd mentioned the fact that DBN is a wholesale bank. And what that means is that we're not going to have platforms to be able to have branches all over the place, because we know these participating financial institutions already have the network. So we're going to ensure that we work through the participating financial institutions to be able to reach out to their customers. They have the day-to-day business running with all these MSMEs, so they'll be able to reach out to them. So that is a different thing we're going to do as a wholesale bank. To answer the question of Mr. Okonkwo about how do we ensure sustainability, we all mentioned issues. You mentioned all the different interventions that have happened and they have all failed. Why? Again, the issue of sustainability. So in crafting the DBN model, one of the greatest things about it is how do you sustain it? And that's why you're going to run it principally like a private/public sector partnership into some way. And you're going to have investments from beyond the public sector and also have private sector investment. Okay? If you look at some of the development partners who are investors, impact investors in DBN, you realize that they also have experiences across different geographies. What has worked best? Okay, so sustainability for DBN to be able to ensure that you raise internal funding to be able to sustain your business is one of the key things. And that's why when Cleaver talked about single digit, I said I didn't mention that. We're going to be more commercially viable, but ensure that at the end of it all, developmental impact of the bank is felt. Ensure that MSMEs are able to have access, ensure that they have to have it in the long run, become affordable, because when you intervene in such a way that it's sustainable funding, eventually, and the macros now begin to work in your favor, obviously, you're going to get better interest rates. So I think that's the comment I want to make. But just to the comment of Mr. Obina, again, we need to be careful to imagine that government is going to be able to do everything. You said government should take the risk and ask. It won't work that way. There are points, like we have almost 10 different issues facing MSMEs. They are the number 1 to 5 are pretty much creating the environment to be able to operate. All right, then you talk about the pricing when it comes to number 6. So we should be careful as to expect that there's going to be one magic wand to turn everything around and say, okay, government take all the risk. And even if you take that, how do you take risk? Are you going to guarantee? And that's why I say DBN coming in, providing partial guarantees to some of the financial institutions where necessary, will also help them and encourage them to lend to that sector.
Yamama, you were mentioned along the line, and I'd like you to come in there. because we talked about building capacity, we talked about assessing fund outside of the space that we originally know, that are less collateral driven. We don't want to talk along that line.
Okay, I'll first of all start with the last question from Mr. Okonkwo. First of all, I'm not from NERSAL, but I think I have a fair deal of idea of how they plan to sustain it. So NERSAL is a PLC, and I think they have strong sustainability clauses around, sustaining the whole thing. And I'll use this to answer a question from, I think, the gentleman that asked the second question about incentive. So in agriculture, which has one of the largest number of SMEs in these, the 36 million, NERSAL was set up. You'll see the banners, I think, outside. It's the Nigerian Incentive-Based Risk-Sharing System for Agricultural Lending. It's there to de-risk agriculture and also to incentivize lending by commercial banks to farmers, to SMEs in the agricultural value chain. And I think it's an incredibly brilliant idea that if implemented, and it is being implemented, would go a long way in especially de-risking agricultural lending and also incentivizing it. Exactly what you asked. You can definitely talk to Mr. Okonkwo about that because it looks like you've figured it out all. And then lastly, the question bordering around cooperatives, or was it a comment? Well, the question and the comment. We've heard about cooperatives in Kenya and in Ghana and other places. I think it's immensely great to have a cooperative, but we don't even need to look outside Nigeria to see what a cooperative in agriculture or in SME could do for the economy. All we need to do is look in our own past. I mean, I wasn't born, but I hear and I see the history whereby we had a marketing board, we had a farmer supply company, we had these very robust structures that gave us the groundnut pyramids, that gave us the cocoa that was exported, that gave us amazing things that made Nigeria what it was or what it is. Why don't we look back and implement these systems with a little touch of the modern things that we have now, like technology? And I believe that's what a lot of entrepreneurs like myself are doing currently, and we just need to do more of that to realize the benefits of having such.
Thank you very much. We are home stretch now. A round of applause for Yamama there. We want to have, if each and every one of us will take away one point from the discussions, this is the time to take that point. One actionable solution to our discussion today. We're talking about access to capital. And I'd like to start from Ade Ayeyemi. I know I didn't go to Helios, but I'll come to you as a wrap-up. One actionable solution in 1 minute.
One actionable solution, we should have credit guarantee scheme for the small and medium-scale enterprises that will take away the risk element that allow other people to be able to lend to them. Thank you.
Then, Kamal, what is your way out, looking at the new solutions to a less collateral-driven option in accessing capital?
I think ultimately it's make yourself more investable. That's a real thing. Make yourself more investable. If you cannot be, if lending rates are so high, make yourself more investable, one, by making your investment opportunity less risky, or making the vehicle more attractive, either by creating scale or any other way you can enhance the opportunity and convince somebody that this is indeed that you will indeed deliver on this opportunity when we've spoken about some of the ways to do that.
And thank you very much, making yourself more investable and looking at the investor in the eye to know what he or she will cherish, looking at what you are doing. Tony Okpanachi, the Chief Executive of Development Bank of Nigeria, what is the way forward?
Yeah, there are two major acts that have been signed into law, which I think operationalization of them will actually help a lot in finding, and that is one where you talk about the Credit Reporting Act, where to ensure that the creditworthiness of MSMEs can easily be assessed And secondly, the National Collateral Registry, where movable assets can also be used to secure loans. I'm sure that will help in getting financial institutions to be interested in funding SMEs.
Thank you very much. Laws, the legal perspective to it, and what could be done going forward. And now we'll go to Yamama. Well, you represent a whole lot of, I would say, all the micro, small, and medium enterprises in Nigeria, and you've set a standard for yourself. What would you want them to take away from this conversation?
For me, it's all borders to value chain integration. If the banks or the investors are saying they cannot look at the entrepreneur or the startup or the SME as an entity, then look at the entire value chain. For instance, in agriculture, if you're a farmer, the bank could look at the entire value chain. Look at the person that provides seeds for you. Look at the one that processes it, that is, take the produce from you. Look at the end user, and then holistic approach to lending or to investing, so that you could be able to see the flow of your money. If I'm saying I'm going to buy a tractor and you're not sure I'll buy it, all right, let's look at the input provider that provides the tractor. Give them the money. All I need is the tractor, not the money, right? And across the value chain, we could replicate that. I think that's my take.
Thank you very much. The conversation centered on access to capital, and the panelists have been able to touch on a whole lot of issues, the new solutions revolving around the private equity, capital, ventures, and all that, expanding to crowdfunding and what have you, and also brought to fore the need for government to create environment that will enhance investment. Of course, investable opportunities abound. There are still challenges on ground where you have to make access to capital for 3 years. This needs to be changed. Need to look at the regulatory issues, issues of governance. The technical partnership perspective is very key if you want to succeed in business. When you have ideas, your ideas could lead to wealth if you tap into the right opportunities. And the place of formalizing your businesses is also very key to helping you to access capital. That's what Ayeyemi did say, and the role of technology and financial inclusion. The place of pension scheme and the pension fund, how can it be well utilized to achieve the ultimate objective of making micro, small, and medium enterprises, or assessing fund as the case may be. And of course, the participants, the audience did make their input very loud. We also recognize the place of Development Bank of Nigeria in providing long-term funds to Nigerians and micro, small, and medium enterprises and other businesses as the case may be, where he also talked about the sustainability. And of course, we had the option of the social economy, what is described as social economy, where you have to make contributions and put funds together. The place of cooperatives in the area of specialization, areas of comparative advantage, be it in textile, be it in other areas, you can come together as a group and access funds or access materials that could assist you to create wealth or achieve production at the end of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, you have new solutions in assessing capital. I thank you all very much, as I want to appreciate, once again, members of this great panel, talking about the Group Chief Executive Officer of EcoBank Transnational Incorporated, Mr. Ade Ayeyemi. Thank you so much. I also like to say special thanks to the Chief Executive Officer of Helios Investment Partners, Mr. Kamal Bakrin. Well, thank you so much. We have the Chief Executive Officer of Development Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Tony Okpanachi. We thank you so much for your perspectives. And of course, not leaving out the founder of Vedant Agri-Tech Limited, a member of the Forbes 30, Mr. Nasri Yamama. We thank you so much for your perspective. I cannot end this conversation without appreciating each and every one of you for your questions, for your perspective, for listening. I'd like a round of applause to all of you. Thank you so much. The moderator has been Cliff Ayoze, a business editor of Nigerian Television Authority. Thank you so much for the honor.
I think Steve is the rapporteur's delight. They are already giving them the highlights they need. Can we put our hands together for this amazing camp? Please, Mr. Chairman, can you step up here now for the photograph? And while they are doing that, let me just announce, in your program, you saw that the Policy Commission breakout session was put at, originally, at 2 p.m., but it actually starts immediately after this. Just step out, grab a cup of tea or coffee, and then you proceed to your venue. And these are the 5 breakout commissions. The first one that is on the Niger Delta area in terms of growth opportunities in the Niger Delta area, that will be holding an Ogun and Nasarawa Hall in the main hotel, floor 02. Low carbon growth investment opportunities in the Niger Delta. Infrastructure Policy Commission unlocking opportunities through infrastructure and urban development. That will be in Borno Rivers, again in the main hotel. Real estate, achieving socioeconomic diversification in the real sector value chain. That will be right here in the Congress Hall. And then science and tech will be in FCT Hall upstairs. Those are the policy commissions, but just step out, take a cup of tea or coffee, and then you proceed to your venue. And then when we come back, it will be lunch at 2 o'clock. The startup pitch event will be at 3 o'clock. And then we have our final plenary for the day at 4 p.m., focused on NASBA. So enjoy your tea or coffee. Enjoy your tea or coffee. And then we'll come back here at 4 p.m. for NASBA.